Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Ginny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control. Across states, where are teachers' unions strongest and weakest today? A recent Thomas B. Fordham Institute report asked this question and ranks states based on key measures of union strength. Amber Northern joins Freedom to Learn today to discuss the report's key findings, including which states moved up and which moved down in rankings since a 2012 version of the report. Amber is Senior Vice President for Research at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and she serves on the Virginia Board of Education. She received her PhD in Education Policy and Evaluation from the University of Virginia, and she started her career as a high school teacher. Amber Northern, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Thank you, Ginny. So excited to be here.
Well, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. The Thomas B. Fordham Institute has issued a new report, A Crowded Table, Teacher Union Strength in 2026. Why is this an important topic? Maybe why is it an important topic to you all as an organization? Why do you think that it's important to take a look at relative strength of teachers' unions?
Well, as a former teacher back in the day, and so from an early age in my career, I saw the influence of teachers' unions relative to what we were trying to do in the classroom, thought they kind of bullied us into being recruited. And in many ways, historically, teachers' unions have impeded some of the good things we're trying to do for kids, some of the good reforms. They've certainly been against school choice, which obviously we at Fordham are big fans of school choice. And often, on the one side, you say, well, they're fighting for their members, but often when they're fighting for their members, it means they're not fighting for the right things for kids. Mm-hmm. And so, at a very basic level, that's why I'd say that they've historically been very important to look at as advocacy players, very powerful advocacy players in many places, relative to their members and resources that they have to fight against the things that we think are best for kids.
And this is not the first time that you all have put out a report of this nature. The first one was back in 2012. Anything that you'd want to say about that 2012 report and what inspired you to go ahead and update it this year?
Janus was one thing that happened, right? Which is the Supreme Court law that basically prohibited unions from collecting agency fees from non-members. So in other words, you can't collect money from folks who aren't members of the union.
Yeah.
And we had a sinking feeling that might have influenced membership across states. And also this thing of just a resurgence of education advocacy organizations that really weren't there in 2012. We wanted to see, okay, what impact might these other players have relative to influencing education policy? So I don't know. We just felt like, number one, it'd been a long time. Yeah. Number two, Janus, and number three, we just felt like there are a lot more players at the table than there used to be. Not to give away the headline, but maybe it's time to do that. But our big takeaway really was that we felt like union strength was on the decline since 2012, that we had seen a number of state unions actually decline. And we used the bulk of the metrics were the same from the last time, not all of them, but some of them. But enough of them were the same to say, you know what, it really looks like there's a pattern here of declining strength in most states. So that was a big headline for us. Membership had declined in most states. I think it was
46 of the states plus DC, the membership's gone down.
The membership's gone down. So, I mean, it's a lot. That's exactly right. And in most states, the proportion of resources that go to, funding particular state candidates for office had also gone down. So those are two big metrics that we tend to track that are both in decline.
Yeah, key findings, as you said, teachers' unions appear to be weakening. And those are examples of how they're weakening. Number two, blue states still have the strongest unions. I guess that's not really a surprise now, is it?
Yes.
And then a third one was that there were 10 states experienced at least a 10 rank increase or decrease in overall ranks. There wasn't complete stability across the country with that. Before we dig into the findings and talk about some of the sub-indicators and the nuances, do you personally have any additional key findings that you want to flag?
When I looked at it and saw that the 7 states that were ranked in the top 10 last time in 2012 were still there, right?
Mhm.
And the 7 states that ranked in the bottom in 2012 were still there. So we didn't see a lot of movement at the top and the bottom, right? You saw quite a bit of shifting in the middle.
Mm.
And so to me, again, other than the blue state finding, there were quite a bit in the top 10 and bottom 10. There was quite a bit of stability there too. So
Mhm.
in the anchoring points.
Well, as a longtime listener and fan of Amber's Research Minute on the Education Gadfly podcast, I know that you're particularly gifted at explaining complex research in digestible ways.
Thank you.
And the report examined 5 areas of union strength using 59 measures
Yeah,
or
I know. Why couldn't we
70.
get to 60? I don't know.
Okay, but so it was more than last time, right? More
Yes.
than 2012. There were plenty that were added. A lot of them were school choice related, which was interesting. Okay, and these are measures that are available from publicly available data sets,
That's
from
right.
surveys. What else should listeners know about the
Yeah,
methodology?
I mean, we looked at strikes this time, and that was a big bucket that we didn't have last time because the researchers that we were working with were pretty gifted in terms of tracking strikes. That was part of their research as
Mm.
personal union scholars. And so that was one we were able to add. That was a pretty big deal. And we also widened. There's one perception survey where we asked folks on the ground in each of these states. I mean, these were journalists and
Yeah.
education advocates and union representatives and
Governors,
policymakers.
education advisors, I think.
GEPA's
Big
government
one.
education advisor. So we actually widened the types of people that we asked for their perceptions of the union on the ground and how strong they were. So that was another big addition because we felt like that was really a very important measure because you can look at all the numbers and say, well, wow, they really look powerful. But when you ask folks on the ground about their perceptions and did they influence X, Y, and Z, you begin to say you can have a lot of sort of tangible resources and membership, but you might not be perceived as powerful, which is another important sort of irony in some of these places.
Yeah, I think the perceived influence category is really interesting because I do feel like when you're talking about unions, there are a number of areas that can't be concretely measured or extracted
Mhm,
from a data
mhm.
set. I mean, you're talking about a powerful entity in a state that sometimes the power comes from kind of a cult of personality.
Right.
There are a handful of union leaders that we know from around the country. I mean, goodness, the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, for
Yes.
example, the head of I think it's the LA teachers unions who got a lot of attention during COVID for
Right.
downplaying the harm to students. Is
Yeah.
that where that cult of personality is captured in that
Yeah, I
perceived
definitely
influence?
absolutely see some folks with big personalities
Mhm.
that kind of have maybe their bark is bigger than their bite, and leads to that perception. I actually looked at this one because I was sort of fascinated by it too, and I don't know if you dug in, but 69% of the participants across states didn't list unions as the most influential player. When it came to state education politics. So
Yeah.
that's pretty jarring. It was actually only 36%, a little over a third, that had the unions at all, I think, in their top five of, players that were most influential in state education politics. So, I mean, I think that's why we landed on a crowded table, right? There are a lot more folks that are trying to exert influence over state education politics than there were in 2012.
Yeah, and we're gonna wanna talk about who those folks are because I think that's a really interesting takeaway here and good news from my perspective. A little more on the personality stuff. Sometimes those personalities become even more powerful. So Chicago Teachers Union put their organizer into the mayor's seat. So, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, he's technically on union leave from Chicago Public Schools, and
Yeah.
he is the
Yeah.
mayor of
That's something. I
of the
know.
city. So,
Yep.
when we're kind of going through in this methodical way, is that captured?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we're definitely asking folks on the ground, are union members particularly influential, when it comes to bargaining? How many of the union members were former educators? We ask about that, which is an important piece. And honestly, California was the top union perceived as the most influential and powerful, which I think resonates for a lot of folks.
Mhm.
Rhode Island, New Mexico, Oregon were also in the top. So yeah, it's an important measure.
Interesting that you mentioned California. California came to mind a couple times as I was going through this. Once, because I spoke to someone from California earlier this week, who was like, and excuse my language, was like, "Well, this is BS. The unions are as powerful as ever. They always win." So that, I guess you're saying, is maybe an
That's the
understandable.
perception, exactly right, and
Yeah.
then that's why they came out on top. I think they were far away the perceived the strongest union.
Right, and if you dig into the measures, you had the actual number of political ads that
That's
are
right.
put out by the union. In the report, it says between 2020 and 2022, California teachers unions sponsored 6,727 political ads for state and local races. It's not a shocking number because that is how the union operates in California. And then strikes were measured in this report, and the
That's right.
California Teachers Association has been undergoing a very aggressive strike strategy across the state over the last year or so.
Yes.
And so, of
Yes.
course, a California resident is going to know the power and the
That's
disruption
right.
caused by the union. So, policy wins and losses, that's another big category that you all were looking at. And state level spending on education, employment benefits, teacher compensation, those are all gauging the amount of money going to, the report says, union priority causes. And sure, the NEA puts out an annual report talking about its way of measuring teacher salaries and bemoaning that they aren't high enough, even though that's the union's job to get the salaries up. So I
Certainly.
just kind of wonder, yes, unions like to complain about salaries, but they seem to
Mhm.
be pouring a lot of resources and energy into other policy areas that have nothing to do with these
Do with
topics, nothing to
right.
do with what directly impacts teachers
That's right.
and their
And
employment benefits. So they are opposing school choice, and that's on the report's list.
yes,
They're anti-Israel. They're really into, whatever ideology is the flavor of the day. So
that's
do
right.
you really think that teacher compensation and employment benefits are top union priorities and therefore a measure
Yeah.
of relative
Yeah,
strength?
no, it's a really good point, and it's something that we weren't able to capture completely in the report. But I definitely think, I mean, most folks who follow unions know that they are not only directing money to education causes. I mean, most of these causes are broadly blue democratic causes. And I think, as a teacher, frankly, that was one thing that I didn't realize, when they came sort of trying to encourage us to to join in Virginia. Um, didn't realize that that my money wasn't going just to raise my salary, right? That's a great talking point to try to recruit a teacher, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We're gonna really fight for higher salaries for you. But yeah, not to know the majority, in my opinion, that was going to other causes that were had nothing to do with education, but were just broadly liberal causes.
So you discover that kind of on your own as a teacher. Do you feel like there's more public awareness about that?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even since 2012, that the
It's a
unions maybe aren't just about employment benefits?
Yeah, I don't know. I wanna
Mhm,
say yes. I wish I could say yes, but I definitely don't have anything to point to, right? Like, that wasn't a
mhm,
particular thing that we ask in the perception survey, how are they directing things to other areas?
mhm.
But I do feel like, just as by virtue of just this pattern we saw in the data, that's gotta be part of the story, right? That folks are now getting smarter about, why they what the advantages are to joining a union. And as you said, in 46 states, we've got fewer members. So you've
Yeah.
got to think that they're wisening up about, what the union stands for.
Well, one of the changes that you all mentioned since 2012, so there was Janus, and then there's this new federal era, NCLB to ESSA, but also the COVID era closures and the union
Yeah.
role during that. That was eye-opening for a lot of people. That's something that's changed since 2012. So I would say maybe there are those of us within our certain policy circles or social media bubbles that are increasingly aware of what union priorities are and are not. But maybe broadly, there's a bigger population that's aware that unions weren't awesome during COVID, and in fact, they were harmful, and they're
Yeah,
rewriting that history now. But
that's right. No,
there has been
it's
a
a
backlash.
great point, and that is a point that we talk about in the forward as another just sort of, throw that in the soup too, relative to, the perceptions of unions and how parents were able to sort of get a bird's eye view when their kids were out of school for so long.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right that that's playing a part in how folks understand and see union influence.
Let's talk about the states with the strongest and the weakest unions. You'd mentioned that the top 10, the top of the top 10 from before 2012, most of them are still there. Vermont,
Yes.
California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Hawaii are,
Top five.
um,
Yep.
why would you say? Like, I mean, yes, there's these 59
Yeah.
indicators, but main
Yeah.
reasons.
I think what we found is membership and resources most
Okay.
correlated with strength. So if you look at those top five, you've got the vast majority of teachers who are members of that state union.
Mhm.
And again, the amount of money that they're putting towards candidates, and ads and that sort of thing. So those were the biggest that, out of all the things we looked at, those were most sort of correlating with the strength of that union membership and resources.
Yeah, and I want listeners to know that you can delve into the specifics of this. So New Jersey was on the list. 97% of teachers are union members, for example. Like, when you're saying vast majority, yes.
It really is, yes.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
high
and
percentage.
Washington, New York, also 97%, Hawaii 96%. So yeah,
And that contrasts pretty significantly from the nationwide average and then from what you're gonna find in other states where teachers are realizing, I don't need to join this union. In fact, I don't want to." Okay, so states with the weakest teachers unions: Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Mississippi. So
that's right.
weakest would
So
be
opposite, fewest members, fewest number of dollars, um, not perceived strong.
okay.
Each of those five buckets that you went through before, the policy wins, the losses, the involvement in politics, each of those buckets, like consistently low scoring. And also just, I think the other one we really globbed to was the revenues per teacher, right? And
So low
basically
in some of these states. Oh my
so
gosh.
low, right? I think it was $72 in Mississippi. And let me look at my notes. Highest in New Jersey,
1,400.
1,400. Yeah, 1,400. So that's another like big measure, right?
Right, and, if you're talking about states where teachers don't make as much as other states, thank
That's right.
goodness they don't have over
Yes, that's
$1,000
exactly right.
being deducted from their paycheck for
Yep.
causes that they may not support, probably not
Yes.
support in some cases. It makes a
Yeah.
a
In
lot more
red
sense that
states.
it's under 100 versus over 1,000. Yeah.
Yes.
When we're talking about these teachers' union dues, when you think back to when you were starting out in teaching, you said that the teachers union was recruiting by saying, okay, your dues are going to go towards efforts to increase your salary. Were there other cases being made for why you should be
Oh,
having your
yes.
salary
It
docked
was
like that?
we were going to be sued, Jenny. I could easily get sued
Yeah.
as a teacher, and I would not what was I gonna do? I was not gonna have any recourse. There was no way I was gonna be able to pay for my lawyer's fees if I were sued for, a stupid reason. And so it was a lot of both, we're gonna get you a lot more money, and scare tactics of, if you don't join, you're gonna have a lawsuit on your hand that's frivolous and you're not gonna be able to fight for it. And we're gonna fight for you. It was a scare tactic that's quite effective, I think, as a brand new teacher when you've never heard of that. And you weren't taught that, you were gonna be sued in the classroom by, a parent who might have it out for you.
Well, and you're talking about brand new teacher. I mean, unions are recruiting in the colleges of education. They have
Yeah, they've gone down. Yeah.
recruitment strategies that start bringing in the teachers as they're going to college and learning how to be a teacher. These are young people that are being targeted with this threat. But there's good news out there that teachers are joining these alternative professional associations. That was mentioned in the report. That's something that I've observed as well. And that these associations are very intentionally avoiding political involvement. And they also charge lower membership dues. So it's kind of a deal. And then you get protected from these things that the unions say you need protection from. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, there's
Yes.
one, actually, one of them reached out to us, sort of I'd say it's a more reformy, right? It's not and they sometimes are called associations,
Mhm.
but yes, they're alternative to the traditional teacher unions group, and they're much more inclined to actually fight for education issues and not these other things that we talked about. So yeah, the one in South Carolina in particular, is pretty strong, and it's an alternative to the NEA and AFT.
Yeah, so there's some good news in the midst of our
Mhm.
conversation. You don't have to be in a union to receive some of the benefits that they claim to offer. Collective bargaining laws, Amber, this is something that we're dealing with in Virginia as far as a big change recently, and it's something that you all looked at nationwide. So these laws and these policies don't necessarily mean like if you have weak collective bargaining laws and policies, that doesn't necessarily mean that the state has the weakest unions.
That's right.
It's not the best indicator of union strength.
That's right.
Why do you think
Yeah.
that is?
Yeah. Well, I think there are so many other ways that unions can exert their influence.
Okay.
And I also feel like, and we found this in another report years ago, that districts, principals actually have more leeway than they think they have relative to making changes. And often the union contract is seen as a scapegoat for things that they might not want to do. I
Mm,
can't do it, or, it's not allowed, that sort of thing. It just seems to be the easier path forward than being a change agent sometimes, as sad as that sounds. But so yeah, it's not, sometimes it's presented as, the big obstacle, and that's not always the case. In Virginia, you mentioned Virginia, my
yes.
home state, in 2021, we removed our prior prohibition against teacher collective bargaining. So that meant that my home state went from 47th, not very powerful, to 29th in strength. So moved up to the pack in part because of that removal in 2021.
So you have a unique perspective on this as a state board of education member in
Yes.
Virginia. Have you seen evidence of the shift in power? Or let's be honest, the VEA was always very powerful in Richmond.
Yes. Yes. Yes, they are. And continue to be, and,
Yeah.
show up at every meeting
Yeah.
to talk about their priorities. So again, to this point of, using the bully pulpit, even if you're not perceived as a strong union state, that bully pulpit and the perception of strength that unions can play, with that, so to speak, and use it to enhance, their own power and preferences.
Yeah, bully pulpit and like you said, show up to every meeting like that, just
Mhm.
ever presence
That's right.
versus, parents come and go through the system
That's right.
and reformers sometimes come and go. Outside groups might invest in a state, then they might move on. The union is always
That's
there.
right. That's right.
Like-minded allies were also mentioned as a
Yes.
source of strength, and there've been a number of reports coming out recently about unions funneling money. They might not like the term funneling. Unions
Right.
providing funds to
Yes. Yes.
organizations to maybe do their political work or advocacy on their behalf.
That's
Is
right.
that the sort of thing that you all had in mind? The report authors had in mind talking about like-minded allies? Who are they?
Yeah. No, absolutely. There are certain parent groups that are sort of for union priorities, and there are parent groups that are anti-union priorities.
Mhm.
So those have seen a resurgence. I think parent advocacy, even if, you know, I don't know how, to the extent that some of these groups are really run by sort of everyday parents, is questionable. But we've definitely seen a resurgence of parent groups. I mean, on the plus side, pro side, we've also seen an increase in these state education advocacy groups. There's an organization called PINET, Policy Innovation Education, and many of those members, are sort of for school choice and for, pro kid policies. So we have seen quite a growth in those. I think I put in the report we had 30 in 2012. We've got 180 in 2026. So
Okay, and so that's where when you're surveying, say, governors, education and advisors, and other folks in the state capitals, and they're saying they're not putting unions at the top of the list. That's because you have all these other players at the crowded table that
Table
weren't, yeah, that weren't
weren't
around
there. Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So
New
parent
players.
organizations, school choice organizations, I think national organizations was mentioned,
Yeah, yep,
like
national ones as well.
union,
I mean,
but
I feel like we've had, you know, new boutique sort of national organizations that are looking at curriculum, that are looking at, you know, teacher colleges of education and what they're teaching.
mm.
So we have seen a growth in sort of particular issues at the national level that maybe we didn't have in
Mhm.
2012 either.
California unions have launched strike after strike, and they're negotiating fiscally unsustainable contracts. That's pretty powerful. California is an example of union power. I just want to put Massachusetts out there as well as another entity that has been launching a pretty aggressive strike strategy. And this was more in 2024. There were quite a few illegal strikes in Massachusetts and bargains that were struck that were fiscally unsustainable. And so now the Washington Post even pointed out in an editorial that the local Massachusetts communities are having to raise taxes and start the layoff process to pay
Yeah.
for this. So power
Yeah.
can really cause problems down
Well,
the
and
road. Yeah.
exactly, and how that's power's covered, right? You know, we at one time were looking at newspapers and to see how the newspapers were covering these things, you know, whether
Mm.
they were sort of treating union-friendly perspective or not. You know, whether they were actually, you know, laying this at the feet of the unions at all. And so that's another part of the perception of strength is how your media treats things like
Mm.
strikes. That is that these poor teachers aren't getting paid enough, and God bless them that they've got to fight for their pay. Or you know, or is it something that's actually more clear-eyed in terms of what's going on?
Yeah, maybe we're getting some more retrospective media coverage, but that doesn't matter if the agreements are already in place and the layoffs and the tax increases are rolling out. It's too late at at that point. But strikes are illegal in something like, I want to say 39 states. Public sector workers are not supposed to strike. The report did look at that, right? The prevalence of strikes, that was an addition this year.
Yeah, that was a new addition. And again, I think they saw an increase, especially around that Red for Ed period. You remember
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
We saw a
That's
wave
before
of,
I started getting really fired up about unions, but yes, I was aware of that.
yes,
Pre-COVID.
pre-COVID. And that was a period where we saw, you know, quite an upsurge in strikes. And yeah, still seeing them today, and some of these, especially these places that are ranked most highly in terms of strength. So it's still a very effective tool, I think, for unions, especially around the parameters of collective bargaining, obviously.
Are there any action items that you would recommend for policymakers, for people like you at the State Board of Education level? Or do
Yeah.
you just want them to read this and kind of ponder it?
Well, of course, I wanted to read it, but I also there are things I just wish I was at EWA recently, the writers conference, and there are just some things that I wish that folks would realize the types of questions they need to ask. I mean,
Mm.
pensions is a big one, right?
Oh
Like
my gosh.
pensions are just off the charts, and nobody seems to realize that a lot of this is going towards retired teachers who have these very generous pension plans that the unions have advocated for a long time, and it's sort of sacrosanct to even think that you could, you know, change this going forward. And I don't think that that's just an example issue, but I just don't think that the common, you know, folks and even policymakers realize the impact that unions are having on decisions that, you know, are really crippling their budgets.
Yeah. So profiles of the individual states, some have been published already,
That's
and
right.
then the rest will be released through the end of July. That's an interesting approach. Uh,
Yep.
so
Yep. No, we
keep checking back if your state's not up there. Is that what you would
Yeah,
recommend?
we were hoping to kind of, you know, get a second bite at the apple because some folks are just interested in the national
Mm.
findings and some folks want to dig into their state. So we didn't want to hold up the report to finish all the states. So hopefully it'll work out for us. But yes, and if there are some entrepreneurial types of folks who want to just look at the whole entire data set, they can email me at Fordham, honestly, and I'll make sure they get it, because that was another thing that we wanted to do with the first one, is make sure that folks had access to the data because they were able to use it. They were able to use the strengths indicators to look at outcomes that they were interested in, which was really helpful, I think, for getting the reports in more hands.
Well, Amber, I like to wrap up our episodes with a myth. And is there a pervasive, pernicious myth about teachers union, about union power that you would want to tackle today?
That is a really good question. I'm going to say that I think it's the main focus of the report, which is that unions continue to be powerful in the blue states, but they really are not as powerful in most of the country as they used to be. And that's an optimistic note, I think, to end on, because I think a lot of folks think that they are, the only player in the room and they have power in every single state, and that is just not the case. And so we should really continue to try to move the needle in these places where they aren't as strong, and continue to fight against them in the places where they are.
Well, Amber Northern, thank you for your commitment to high quality research, to common sense education reform, and thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thank you for having me, Jenny.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.